Welcome to Better Futures.
I can certainly understand that because I and many others, I'm sure, are fairly well versed in the economic differences between races and ethnic groups here in the United States. However, within those specific ethnic groups, I am much less well versed in terms of the range of rich white people versus poor white people and the populations thereof.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm getting at there is the general rule is that white people have some level of affluence. It's kind of like maybe instead of putting in less intellectual terms, but kind of explaining, it's like I went to Prior Lake High School, which is a suburban school south of the cities here. It's a pretty upper middle class. I remember growing up there, and a lot of the kids that I went to elementary school with had moved there within the last couple of years because their parents had gotten jobs in the area. And then there's a minority of us who had families that had always lived there. And I kind of noticed that there was a very stark class difference, but the majority of white America does experience a level of comfort that I don't really experience. But it's kind of like this. It's like I don't see my individual problems as a poor white person. They aren't common enough to really constitute a class. A class of people is like if you go down to South Side Chicago. I spent a week with my ex-girlfriend and her family down there once, and it was amazing because it is an extremely Black community down there by Chicago Heights and Ford Heights. And that's really a class force. That is a whole region of impoverished people because they're Black. And then myself, however, I always feel pretty isolated because there are just not a lot of white people who experience my problems. So the way I describe myself with some of my white friends is that we're white people with Black people's problems. But the point, though, is that we aren't poor whites. That's not a class. We're just white people who happen to have Black people's problems and live in Black neighborhoods because we're just that tiny percentage of white people who just can't hang. A lot of us are disabled and gay or transgendered.
See, well, that does, to me, carry some echo in terms of what you had been saying at the beginning of this interview about so much of online discourse is focused on having the right ideas to the neglect of right action.
Exactly. I see so much of that on Left Book where it's like ideas sometimes get in the way of, I feel terrible. I don't actually know the quote. I might be misquoting Mao here, but he said something like, reading too many books makes you stupid. And I guess that's kind of what he was saying about that is if you read too many books, you don't actually get out in the world and apply what you've read. And then it becomes kind of like this abstract, insular system that really has nothing to do with reality.
Well, with that in mind, and to move away from theory back towards practice, I am just curious if you have some examples of what the sort of good neighbor vanguard, grassroots mutual aid, direct action network, how that might operate in a true proletarian community such as the South Side of Chicago.
I don't want to talk too much about Chicago because my time there is limited and I'm not of that community. But what I can talk about is, what I've done here in my own complex, because the complex I live in, just for a little context, it's a low income building, and it probably, decades ago was part of the public housing project, I'm guessing. Right now it's run by a 501c3 nonprofit called Aon Management. Their president or CEO or whatever, the head of the board of directors or whatever, I think he clears like $200,000 a year. I looked up there, I found I forget the name of the tax form. But I mean, these buildings are insane. There's about 15 or so buildings on this complex, and each one must have at least 16 apartments. So, I mean, I did the math though one day, and there's probably close to 10,000 people living in my complex. And it's right next to the freeway. We are wedged, actually. It's kind of remarkable. There's a neighborhood to one side of us of single family homes, and there is a wooden sound barrier dividing us from the single family homes. However, we are on the side facing 494, the big freeway, and we don't have a sound barrier. It's kind of terrible. It's almost insulting. And then there's a liquor store, there's Walmart, a couple restaurants across the street. And it's kind of remarkable because obviously we all shop at Walmart because it really doesn't make economic sense to get in your car and go drive 15 minutes to pay more money for food, So that's kind of the situation here. So, I mean, things are very desperate. We've had a number of murders in the last year. Actually, sadly, let me think here, September 10th, I believe, 2017. Goodness, his name is just escaping me. Brian Quinones. He was shot by the police right here. on, I think it's 77th Street. Yeah, right there. That's where he was murdered by the police, right outside my complex. And we had another shooting last summer. There was a woman in the La Quinta where I was actually putting up some people I was helping at the time and who was stabbed there. So it's, it's Richfield, but things happen in this area that are very sad. There's a woman who was actually just kidnapped and murdered as she was getting off work at the Walmart a couple months ago. And it's just horrible. And so like people can be pretty depressed around here, but the kids like to play. That's the context for where I live. So it can be kind of a depressing place. Make a point to learn your neighbors' names first off. Sorry, it took me forever to get to that. I wanted to kind of like draw a picture of where I live though. Learn your neighbors' names. That's the easiest thing. Get to know them, say hi, say their name when you see them. That's how you get started. When you see that their kids are playing or something, maybe get some toys, get some chalk. It's real simple. This shit is so cheap. Squirt guns, Nerf guns, buy the kids something to play with in the summertime, show that you care. And from there you can ask, are you guys good on food or whatever? I mean, luckily we have these people that come through and Veep. I can't say much bad about Veep. They deliver a lot of free food. But even then, my neighbors, that when they have extra free food, they'll ask me if I want some and give some, and it's very sweet of them. It's really just about the little things. But the main thing is get to know your neighbors. Don't think of them as like strangers. You guys drink the same water. You pay roughly the same rent, and you both pay it to the same people. You breathe the same air. So it's like you got more in common with each other than you do different. And you should treat each other that way.